Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he drove his maintenance rover across the red sand dunes. The twin suns of Kepler 442b beat down on the metal vehicle, making the inside feel like an oven. He had been driving for 3 hours, heading to the outer mining post to deliver spare parts and check on the equipment. Jake was a simple man who fixed things for a living. He had worked as a mechanic for 15 years, first on Earth and now on this alien planet. His hands were rough and stained with oil. His clothes were old and patched, but he was good at his job. When something broke, Jake could fix it. The mining colony of New Houston sat in a valley between tall red mountains. Most of the 30,000 people who lived there were humans, but about 5,000 were aliens called Xanthari. The Xanthari looked like large lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had scales instead of skin, long tails and small wings on their backs. Most Xanthari were taller than humans and much stronger. Jake had worked with many Xanthari over the years. They were good workers and honest people, but they had strange customs that he did not understand. The Xanthari believed in old laws that went back thousands of years. They followed these laws even when the laws seemed cruel to humans. As Jake drove through the empty desert, he saw something that made him stop his rover. In the distance, he could see a group of Xanthari adults walking away from a pile of rocks. They were moving slowly like people do when they are sad. Jake watched them disappear over a hill before he drove closer to see what they had left behind. When Jake reached the pile of rocks, he found something that made his stomach turn. The rocks were arranged in a circle around a shallow hole in the sand. Inside the hole were 6 large eggs, each one about the size of a football. The eggs were buried under a thin layer of sand, but Jake could see cracks in their shells. Something was trying to get out. Jake had never seen Xanthari eggs before, but he knew what he was looking at. These were baby Xanthari, and they had been left here to die. He could hear small, weak sounds coming from inside the eggs. The babies were calling for help, but no one was coming. Jake jumped out of his rover and ran to the buried eggs. He brushed the sand away with his hands, working as fast as he could. The first egg cracked open as he touched it, and a tiny head poked out. The baby Xanthari was no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were a strange mix of purple and black, not the normal green and gold that adult Xanthari had. The little creature looked up at Jake with bright yellow eyes. It made a small chirping sound like a bird asking for food. Jake could see that it was very weak. Its breathing was fast and shallow, and its tiny body was shaking. One by one, Jake pulled the other eggs from the sand. 4 more babies hatched while he worked. The 6th egg was cracked and cold. The baby inside had already died. Jake felt angry and sad as he looked at the 5 living babies and 1 dead one. The living babies all looked different from normal Xanthari. Some had the wrong colors. Others had tiny wings that looked broken or bent. One baby was much smaller than the others. Another had bumps on its head where horns should have grown straight. Jake understood now why the adult Xanthari had left these babies to die. The Xanthari believed that babies who looked different were cursed. According to their old laws, these babies would bring bad luck to their families and their people. The only way to stop the curse was to leave the babies in the sacred sand and let them die. Jake had heard about this custom before, but he had never seen it happen. The Xanthari usually kept their family business private. Most humans in the colony did not know that the Xanthari sometimes left their babies to die. As Jake looked at the 5 tiny creatures, he made a decision that would change his life. He could not leave these babies here to die. It did not matter what the Xanthari believed about curses. These were living beings who needed help. Jake took off his work jacket and wrapped the babies in it. They were cold and getting weaker by the minute. He could feel their small hearts beating fast against his chest as he carried them to his rover. The babies made soft sounds like they were trying to talk to him. Jake put the babies in a toolbox that he lined with spare rags. He turned up the heat in his rover and drove as fast as he could back toward the colony. As he drove, he tried to think about what he would do next. He knew nothing about taking care of alien babies. He did not even know what they ate or how to keep them warm. The babies stopped making noise during the drive back. Jake kept checking on them, afraid they might die before he could get help. Their breathing was very slow, and their eyes were starting to close. Jake pressed harder on the gas pedal, pushing his old rover to its limit. When Jake reached the edge of New Houston, he had to make another choice. He could take the babies to the Human Medical Center, but the doctors there knew nothing about Xanthari. He could take them to the Xanthari part of town, but the Xanthari would probably take the babies back to the desert. Jake decided to take the babies to his workshop. It was not much, just a large metal building where he kept his tools and spare parts, but it was warm and safe, and Jake could think there without anyone bothering him. As Jake parked his rover behind his workshop, he looked down at the 5 tiny aliens in his toolbox. They were so small and helpless. Jake was just a mechanic, but these babies needed him. He was the only person in the world who cared if they lived or died. Jake Morrison had always been good at fixing broken things. Now he had to figure out how to fix 5 broken lives. Jake carried the toolbox into his workshop and set it down on his main work table. The 5 babies in Thari were barely moving now. Their tiny chests rose and fell very slowly, and their skin felt cold to the touch. Jake knew he had to act fast or they would all die. First, Jake needed to make them warm. He looked around his workshop for anything that could help. In the corner, he had several heat lamps that he used for drying paint and warming metal. Jake dragged the lamps over to his work table and pointed them at the babies. The warmth seemed to help a little. The babies started breathing faster, and one of them opened its eyes. But Jake could see they needed more than just heat. They looked thin and weak, like they had not eaten in days. Jake had no idea what babies in Thari ate. He tried giving them water from a small spoon, but they could not swallow it. The water just ran out of their mouths. Jake tried mashed up food from his lunch, but the babies turned their heads away. Nothing he tried seemed to work. After 2 hours of trying different things, Jake was getting desperate. The babies were getting weaker, not stronger. One of them had stopped moving completely, and Jake was afraid it might die soon. Jake made a decision that scared him. He would have to ask for help from someone who knew about aliens. There was only one person in the colony who might be able to help him. Her name was Lisa Parker, and she was a scientist who studied alien life. Jake had met Lisa a few times when she came to his shop to fix equipment. She was a smart woman in her 30s with short brown hair and serious eyes. Lisa worked in the science building in the center of town, where she studied plants and animals from different planets. Jake wrapped the weakest baby in a clean rag and put it in a small box. He drove his rover across town to the science building, hoping Lisa would still be working even though it was late in the evening. The science building was mostly dark, but Jake could see light coming from one window on the 2nd floor. He climbed the stairs and knocked on Lisa's office door. "Come in," Lisa called from inside. Jake opened the door and saw Lisa sitting at her desk, looking at pictures on her computer screen. She looked up when Jake walked in, and her eyes went wide when she saw the box in his hands. "Jake, what are you doing here so late?" Lisa asked. Jake did not know how to explain what he had done. He set the box down on Lisa's desk and carefully opened it. Inside, the tiny Xanthari baby lay still, its breathing so weak that it was hard to see. "I found them in the desert," Jake said. "The Xanthari left them there to die. I could not just leave them." Lisa stared at the baby for a long moment. Then she put on a pair of gloves and carefully picked it up. She held it close to a lamp and looked at its eyes, its mouth, and its tiny claws. "This is a Xanthari hatchling," Lisa said, "but something is wrong with it. Look at these scale patterns. They are all mixed up, and these wing buds are too small." "I know they look different," Jake said. "That's why the Xanthari left them." "They think babies like this are cursed." Lisa shook her head. "Not cursed. Just different. But this little one is dying, Jake. They all need help right now, or they will be dead by morning." "Can you help them?" Jake asked. Lisa was quiet for a minute. Then she nodded. "I can try, but we need to get them to my lab right away. I have equipment there that might save them." Jake and Lisa drove back to Jake's workshop to get the other 4 babies. 2 of them were so weak that they felt like they were already dead. Lisa worked quickly, checking each baby and making notes on a computer pad. Back at Lisa's lab, she set up a special box with controlled heat and humidity. She connected tubes that provided clean air and measured the temperature every few minutes. Then she started mixing different liquids in small bottles. "Xanthari babies need special minerals," Lisa explained as she worked. "Their bodies are different from human babies. They need iron and calcium, but also rare metals that we don't have in human food." Lisa tried feeding the babies different mixtures through tiny tubes. Most of the time, the babies could not keep the food down, but after many tries, she found a mixture that seemed to work. It was made from synthesized proteins, crushed minerals from the planet's soil, and clean water. The feeding process took hours. Each baby had to be fed drop by drop very slowly. Jake held the babies while Lisa used the feeding tube. His big, rough hands were surprisingly gentle as he cradled the tiny creatures. By dawn, 3 of the babies were stronger. They could lift their heads and make small sounds, but 2 of them were still very weak. One baby, the smallest one, had not eaten anything at all. Jake was sure it would die. Lisa worked without stopping for 18 hours. She tried different foods, different temperatures, and different positions for feeding. Jake stayed with her the whole time, helping however he could. Finally, on the second day, all 5 babies ate some food and kept it down. They were still weak, but they were alive. Lisa smiled for the first time since Jake had brought them to her. "I think they are going to make it," she said. But even as Lisa spoke, Jake knew his problems were just beginning. Word was already spreading through the colony about what he had done. Some humans thought he was crazy for interfering with Zenthari customs. The Zenthari were angry that he had taken the babies from the sacred sand. Jake got a message on his communication device from Governor Kate Sullivan, the leader of the human part of the colony. She wanted to see him in her office as soon as possible. Jake knew this meeting would not be pleasant. But as Jake looked down at the 5 tiny aliens sleeping in Lisa's warming box, he knew he had made the right choice. These babies deserved a chance to live no matter what anyone else thought. Jake had always been good at fixing broken things. Now he was learning that sometimes the most important things to fix were not machines but lives. 3 months had passed since Jake found the babies in the desert. Now they were no longer tiny and helpless. Each baby was about the size of a small dog, and they had grown strong enough to walk around Jake's workshop. Jake had given them names based on how they looked. The one with mixed-up scale patterns he called Patch. The smallest one, who had almost died, was now called Runt. The baby with broken wing buds became Stumpy. Another with red-colored scales was Crimson. The one with different colored eyes was Oddball. The last one, who had bumps instead of straight horns, was Spike. The 6 babies had become like children to Jake. They followed him around his workshop every day, watching him work on engines and machines. When Jake ate his lunch, they sat around him like a family. When he took a nap in his chair, they curled up near his feet. Jake was surprised by how smart they were. Patch could solve puzzles that Jake made for her out of spare parts. Stumpy learned to use simple tools even though his wings did not work right. Crimson could tell when Jake was hurt or sick, and she would bring him water or clean rags. Oddball liked to stack things in patterns, making towers out of bolts and screws. Runt, despite being the smallest, seemed to understand what the others needed and helped them when they had problems. Spike was the strongest and liked to help Jake lift heavy things. The babies had also learned to understand human words. When Jake called their names, they came running. When he told them to stay in one place, they listened. When he said bedtime, they all went to their sleeping area in the corner of the workshop. But not everyone was happy about Jake's new family. Word had spread through the entire colony about the human mechanic who had saved the cursed Zenthari babies. Some humans thought Jake was doing a good thing, but others believed he should not interfere with alien customs. The Zenthari were much more upset. In their culture, what Jake had done was not just wrong, it was a terrible crime against their ancient laws. The babies were supposed to die in the sacred sand. By saving them, Jake had supposedly brought a curse on the entire colony. Elder Vash, the oldest and most respected Zenthari leader, had called several meetings with the human government. She demanded that Jake return the babies to the desert immediately. Governor Kate Sullivan tried to find a compromise, but the Zenthari would not change their minds. Things got worse when Commander Thex arrived at the colony. Thex was a Zenthari warrior from the home planet, sent to deal with the problem of the cursed babies. He was bigger than most Zenthari, with dark green scales and scars from many battles. Thex believed strongly in the old ways and had no patience for humans who did not respect Zenthari law. On a hot afternoon, Thex came to Jake's workshop with 4 other Zenthari warriors. Jake was teaching the babies how to sort different types of screws when he heard heavy footsteps outside. The babies sensed danger and quickly moved to hide behind Jake's legs. Thex entered the workshop without knocking. He was so tall that he had to duck under the doorway. His yellow eyes looked around the room until they found the 6 young Zenthari hiding behind Jake. "Human," Thex said in heavily accented English. "You have committed a crime against the laws of my people. You will return these cursed ones to the sacred sand, where they belong." Jake stood up slowly, putting himself between Thex and the babies. They are not cursed, Jake said. They are just different, and they are my family now. Thex's tail lashed angrily behind him. They are abominations. Their twisted forms bring shame to all Zenthari. You do not understand our ways, human. Maybe I don't understand your ways, Jake said. But I understand that these babies did nothing wrong. They deserve to live just like anyone else. The other Zenthari warriors moved closer, but Thex held up a hand to stop them. You refuse to obey our law? He asked. Yes, Jake said simply. Thex nodded slowly. Then I challenge you to ritual combat. If you defeat me in battle, the cursed ones may live under your protection. If I defeat you, they return to the sand where they belong. Jake felt his stomach drop. He was just a mechanic, not a warrior. Thex was trained to fight and was much stronger than any human. But Jake looked down at the 6 young faces staring up at him with trust and fear. He could not let them down. When? Jake asked. 3 days, Thex replied. At sunrise, in the arena behind the Zenthari district. Bring no weapons. We fight with claws and strength only. After Thex left, Jake sat down heavily in his chair. The babies came out from hiding and gathered around him. Patch put her small clawed hand on his arm. Runt climbed into his lap. The others pressed close as if they could protect him with their presence. Lisa Parker arrived an hour later. She had heard about the challenge from Governor Sullivan. Jake, you can't fight him, she said. Thex has killed people in combat before. He is a professional warrior. I know, Jake said. But what choice do I have? If I don't fight, they will take the babies anyway. There has to be another way, Lisa said. Jake looked at his 6 adopted children. They were watching him with their big eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but knowing that something was wrong. These babies had already survived being buried alive in the desert. They had grown strong under his care. They trusted him to keep them safe. No, Jake said. There is no other way. I made a promise to these kids when I dug them out of that sand. I promised to take care of them. I am not going to break that promise now. Over the next 3 days, Jake tried to prepare for the fight. He exercised and practiced moving quickly. Lisa helped him study Zenthari anatomy so he would know where Thex might be vulnerable. But everyone knew that Jake had little chance of winning. The babies seemed to sense what was coming. They stayed close to Jake, following him everywhere. On the last night before the fight, they all slept curled up around his chair in the workshop. As Jake watched them sleep, he thought about how much they had changed his life. Before he found them, he had been alone. He worked, ate, and slept, but he had no real purpose. Now he had a family. He had something worth fighting for, even if it meant he might die trying to protect them. Jake Morrison had always been good at fixing broken things. Tomorrow, he would find out if he could fix the biggest problem of his life. Jake woke up before dawn on the day of the fight. The babies were still sleeping around his chair, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Jake carefully moved away from them without waking them up. He wanted to remember them this way, peaceful and safe. As Jake got dressed, he heard a loud alarm start blaring across the colony. At first, he thought it might be a test of the emergency system. But the alarm kept going, and soon his communication device started buzzing with urgent messages. Jake read the first message and felt his blood turn cold. A massive solar storm was heading toward the planet. The protective shields that kept deadly radiation away from the colony were failing. Everyone had to evacuate to the underground shelters immediately. Jake shook the babies awake. "Come on, kids," he said. "We have to go underground right now." The babies could hear the fear in Jake's voice. They followed him quickly as he gathered emergency supplies and headed for the door. Outside, Jake could see people running in all directions. Humans and Zenthari were both heading for the shelter entrances as fast as they could move. The underground shelters were huge caves that had been carved out of the rock under the colony. They could hold everyone who lived in New Houston, but they were not comfortable. The air was thin, the spaces were crowded, and there was not much food or water. Jake found a spot in one of the smaller caves and made the babies sit close together. He could see fear in their eyes. The loud alarms, the panicked people, and the strange new place all scared them. Patch pressed against Jake's side and Runt climbed into his lap. Governor Sullivan's voice came over the emergency speakers. "The solar storm will hit us in 6 hours," she announced. "The radiation levels outside are already dangerous. No one can go to the surface until the storm passes. That could take 3 to 5 days. Jake tried to keep the babies calm, but he was worried too. The shelters had enough air and water for everyone, but the food supplies were limited. If they had to stay underground for 5 days, people would start getting hungry. On the second day in the shelter, the real problems began. The storm was worse than anyone expected. The radiation levels outside were so high that they would kill a human in minutes. But even worse, some of the equipment that kept the shelters running was starting to break down. The air recycling system in Section C stopped working. The water pumps in Section B were failing. The power generators that kept the lights on were overheating. Repair crews tried to fix the problems, but the spare parts they needed were in buildings on the surface. "We need to get to the surface," said Chief Engineer Ron Martinez. "Without those parts, the life support systems will fail completely." "It's impossible," Governor Sullivan replied. "The radiation will kill anyone who goes outside." That was when Lisa Parker spoke up. She had been watching Jake's 6 babies during the emergency meetings. "The Xanthari babies," she said. "They might be able to survive the radiation." Everyone turned to look at where Jake sat with his adopted children. The babies sensed that people were talking about them, and they moved closer to Jake. "Xanthari evolved on this planet," Lisa explained. "Their scales provide natural protection against radiation. Adult Xanthari can survive low levels of radiation for short periods. These babies have been exposed to the planet's environment their whole lives. They might be able to handle even higher levels." Commander Thex, who had been forced to share the shelter with his enemy Jake, stepped forward. "You want to send children into deadly radiation?" he asked angrily. "Not children," Lisa said. "Young Xanthari who might be our only hope of survival." Jake felt sick at the idea of putting the babies in danger. But he could see that people were starting to get desperate. The air in the shelter was getting stale, and some of the older people were having trouble breathing. Jake looked down at his 6 adopted children. They looked back at him with trust in their eyes. They did not fully understand what was being discussed, but they knew Jake would protect them. "I won't make them do it," Jake said. "It's too dangerous." But Patch, the baby with mixed-up scales, surprised everyone by standing up and walking toward the shelter entrance. She looked back at Jake and made a sound that seemed to say, "I want to help." One by one, the other babies stood up too. Stumpy, Crimson, Oddball, Runt, and Spike all moved toward the entrance. They had heard the fear in the adult voices. They had seen people crying and getting sick. Even though they were young, they understood that their family was in danger. Jake's heart broke as he watched them volunteer to risk their lives. These babies had been thrown away by their own people, left to die in the desert. But now they were willing to save the same people who had rejected them. Lisa quickly put together radiation-resistant communication devices and simple tools that the babies could carry. Jake helped each baby put on a small backpack with the equipment they would need. "Stay together," Jake told them. "Get the parts we need and come right back. Don't try to be heroes." The babies went out in pairs. Patch and Stumpy headed for the power plant to get replacement generators. Crimson and Oddball went to the water treatment facility for new pump parts. Runt and Spike took the most dangerous job, going to the surface communication array to get parts needed to call for help from other colonies. For 6 hours, Jake waited by the communication device, listening for updates from his children. The radiation levels outside were so high that even the Xanthari babies could not stay out for long periods. They had to work fast and take breaks in shielded buildings, but the babies were smart and determined. Patch and Stumpy found the generator parts and carried them back in 2 trips. Crimson and Oddball located the water pump components and figured out how to drag them to the shelter entrance. Runt and Spike climbed the tall communication tower to reach the equipment at the top, working together despite Spike's heavy load and Runt's small size. Commander Thex watched in amazement as the 6 young Xanthari risked their lives to save people who had called them cursed. His own daughter, a young Xanthari named Kira, had been trapped in a collapsed section of the shelter. It was Runt, the smallest and supposedly weakest of the babies, who crawled through the rubble to reach her and carry her to safety. When Runt emerged from the collapsed tunnel with Kira in his arms, Commander Thex felt something change inside him. These defective babies had more courage and honor than many full-grown warriors he had known. By the end of the third day, the babies had retrieved all the critical parts needed to keep the shelter systems running. They had saved hundreds of lives, including the life of Commander Thex's own daughter. When the solar storm finally ended and people could return to the surface, Jake hugged each of his 6 children tightly. They were tired and their scales were dulled from radiation exposure, but they were alive and proud of what they had accomplished. As they walked out of the shelter into the sunlight, Jake saw Commander Thex waiting for them. The big warrior approached slowly, his head bowed in respect. "The ritual combat is no longer necessary," Thex said quietly. "These young ones have proven their honor in the greatest trial of all. They have earned their place among the living." Jake Morrison had always been good at fixing broken things, but his 6 children had just fixed something much more important than machines. They had fixed the broken understanding between two peoples, proving that worth came from actions, not appearance. 1 week after the solar storm ended, Elder Vash called a meeting of the entire Zenthari community. Jake was invited to attend, along with his 6 adopted children. As they walked into the large meeting hall in the Zenthari district, Jake could feel hundreds of eyes watching them. The babies stayed close to Jake, but they were not afraid anymore. They had proven themselves during the storm, and they knew they belonged in this community. Patch held her head high, her mixed-colored scales shining in the light. Stumpy walked with confidence despite his small wings. The others followed with the quiet dignity of young heroes. Elder Vash stood at the front of the hall. She was very old even for a Zenthari, and her scales had turned white with age. Her voice was strong, though, and everyone listened when she spoke. "For 3,000 years, Elder Vash began, our people have followed the law of the sacred sand. Children born with imperfections were taken to the desert to die, so that our bloodline would remain strong and pure." Jake felt the babies tense beside him. They had never heard their story told this way before. "But the events of recent days have taught us something new," Elder Vash continued. "Strength and purity do not come from how we look. They come from how we act." The elder pointed to Jake's 6 children. These young ones were marked for death because their scales were the wrong color. Their wings were too small. Their horns grew crooked. "We called them cursed and threw them away like broken tools." Elder Vash's voice grew stronger. "But when our people faced death in the underground shelters, who saved us? When the radiation would have killed the strongest among us, who risked their lives to bring us hope? It was these 6 children, these supposedly cursed ones, who showed us the true meaning of honor." A murmur went through the crowd. Some Zenthari nodded in agreement, but others looked uncomfortable with what the elder was saying. "I hereby declare," Elder Vash announced, "that the old law of the sacred sand is changed. No longer will we judge our children by their appearance. From this day forward, all Zenthari children will be given the chance to prove their worth through their actions, not their bloodline." Commander Thex stepped forward from the crowd. Jake tensed, remembering their planned fight that had never happened. But Thex did not look angry anymore. "Elder Vash speaks truth," Thex said in his deep voice. "I have seen courage in these young ones that puts my own warriors to shame. The human Jake Morrison has raised them with honor. I formally request that he be granted full parental rights under Zenthari law." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. He looked down at his 6 children who were listening with wide eyes. They understood that something important was happening, even if they did not grasp all the details. "Furthermore," Thex continued, "I propose that these 6 young Zenthari be given adult names, as is our custom when children prove themselves in battle. They have earned this honor." Elder Vash nodded. "Let it be so. Jake Morrison, human of New Houston, you are hereby recognized as the legal parent of these 6 young Zenthari, and you children will choose whether to keep the names your human father gave you, or take new Zenthari names." Patch was the first to speak. Her voice was small but clear. "I want to keep my name," she said. "Jake gave it to me with love." One by one, the others spoke up. Stumpy, Crimson, Oddball, Runt, and Spike all chose to keep their human names. These names had been given to them when they were helpless and afraid. Now the names represented their unique place between 2 worlds. The ceremony ended with a feast that brought together humans and Zenthari for the first time in the colony's history. Jake sat at a table with his 6 children, watching them laugh and play with other young Zenthari. For the first time since he had found them in the desert, They were truly accepted by their own people. 6 months later, Jake's workshop had become much more than a place to fix machines. It was now a community center where young humans and Xanthari worked and learned together. The building had been expanded with help from both governments, and Jake had been given assistance to help with the increased workload. Patch had shown a talent for engineering and was learning to design better mining equipment. Her analytical mind could solve problems that stumped much older workers. Stumpy had become an expert pilot of atmospheric vehicles, proving that flying skills did not depend on having perfect wings. Crimson worked with the medical team, using her keen senses to help diagnose illnesses in both humans and Xanthari. Oddball had discovered an artistic gift, creating sculptures that blended human and Xanthari styles. Her work was displayed in the colony's new cultural center, inspiring others to bridge the gap between species. Runt had grown into a natural leader, helping to settle disputes between human and Xanthari workers with wisdom beyond his young age. Spike had become Jake's primary assistant, his mechanical skills rivaling those of his human father. The colony prospered under this new cooperation. Mining operations became more efficient when human technology was combined with Xanthari knowledge of the planet. Cultural exchanges led to new art, music, and literature that neither species could have created alone. Children of both species grew up playing together, learning each other's languages and customs. Jake often thought back to that day in the desert when he had found 6 dying babies in the sand. He had acted on instinct, unable to let children die when he could save them. He had never imagined that his simple act of compassion would change an entire world. One evening, as Jake was closing up his workshop, all 6 of his children gathered around him as they did every night. They were no longer babies. Patch and Spike were already as tall as Jake's shoulders. In a few more years, they would be full-grown adults with families of their own. "Tell us the story again," Runt asked, as he did most evenings. Jake smiled and began the familiar tale. Once upon a time, there was a human mechanic who found 6 baby dragons buried in the sand. As Jake told the story, he looked at the faces of his children. They knew the story by heart, but they never got tired of hearing it. It was their origin story, the tale of how they went from being unwanted outcasts to beloved family members. When the story ended, as it always did, with the mechanic digging the babies out of the sand, Patch asked her usual question, "Why did you save us, Jake? You did not know us. We were not your people." Jake gave his usual answer, the one that had become true through repetition. "Because you were children who needed help. That made you my people." The 6 young Xanthari nodded, satisfied with this answer. They hugged their human father and went to their sleeping area in the workshop. Jake watched them settle down for the night, still amazed that these magnificent beings had once fit in a toolbox. Jake Morrison had always been good at fixing broken things. But the best thing he had ever fixed was not a machine. It was the broken bridge between 2 species, repaired with nothing more than love, courage, and the simple belief that all children deserve a chance to live. As Jake turned off the lights in his workshop, he could hear the soft sounds of his children sleeping peacefully. Outside, the twin suns of Kepler 442b were setting behind the red mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. It was a beautiful world, made more beautiful by the understanding that had grown between its peoples. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new machines to fix, and new problems to solve. But tonight Jake Morrison was simply a father whose children were safe and loved. And that, he thought, was the best repair job of his entire life.